What I want you to do is I want you to think back to about fifth grade, because that's probably when you learned about different kind of rocks. And what I want you to know is where clay comes from, how it's related to glaze and slip, porcelain, and stoneware. And then I want to go over my gallery of horrors here, things that went wrong. And I want you to draw some pictures and copy some. So, can you all think back to when you first learned about rocks? Where there's igneous rocks, there's sedimentary and metamorphic. So I want you to ask me questions, especially if there's a word you didn't understand. Okay, so first of all, what is this word igneous? If you just look at the IGN, can you think of any other words that start like that? Ignite. When you just put your key in the car, you put it in the ignition. And what do you think of when you think of ignite? Yeah, fire, right? Right? Okay. So now we have to think a little bit about what's happening when we have an earthquake. What's going on when we have an earthquake? Uh-huh. Do you know what's happening? Does anybody can kind of show me with your hands what's happening? Yeah, that's right. And your name is, what's your name? Gail. Okay, so Gail is showing with her hands. One hand is sliding along the other one. So that's us. We're going towards, Baja California. Yeah, we're going towards San Francisco, right? Okay. So that's one way that we have earthquakes. Can anybody show with their hands at the other, or you? That's pretty close. So the reason I'm wearing this Yosemite shirt, right, is it's granite that somehow ended up really high. Do you know how the Mount Everest, Himalayas, how'd they get so high up there? No, not volcanoes. Yeah, they collect. Okay, that you're pretty close now. Show with your hands again. And one is going to go up, and one's going to go down. Yeah, and the one that goes down is going to melt, and then that comes out volcanoes later, or makes new granite. Now your other hand that went up, so he's showing this where two tectonic plates come together, one goes down and one goes up. So we have the granite up here that formed earlier, the Yosemite, and then when the other plate goes down, if it goes down far enough, it starts melting. Okay, so we have to kind of think about that one too. Now, can anybody name the four states of matter? Like what's this solid? Okay, and then you heat it up and becomes, right? Liquid, yeah. And then what's the next state? If you heat it up a little more. What? Vapor, gas, yeah, gaseous, that's the next state. Does anybody know the last state? Nuclear power plants. So we're actually splitting atoms, and then eventually we want to try to do fusion, where we're going to get them together. Does anybody know the name of that state of matter? It starts with a P. Plasma. Plasma. Okay? So we're kind of concerned with solid and liquid here, not so much the gaseous stuff. Okay, so and then let's think also again a little bit more about what we're really doing in this class. You know, you get some clay, you make something, you let it dry, we fire it, and then we put some glaze on it. Okay, but what is glaze really? So we're going to take a look. So right here on my chart, I have a triangle 10. Whenever you see triangle, that means the cone. So the cones are these things right here. And if you look, they have numbers on them. So everybody has a cone in front of you, so go ahead and look. Do you see a 10, a 9, and an 8? Or do you see maybe a 9, a 10, and an 11 that's stamped on the side of your cone? So you're going to always hear me talk about high fire and glaze kiln and cone 10. So does anyone have a cone in front of them where the number 10 is all the way bent down? So maybe the 9 will be down, and the 10 will be down. Now on this particular one, 8 is down, 9 is down, and 10 is down. Does anybody have one with an 11? So on this one, thank you. So on this one we have 9 is down, 10 is down, but 11 hasn't gone down yet. So this was a good firing because we wanted 10 to be down. So to have cone 9 down is a minimum. Now, when the cones start, they are standing straight up. They're just totally standing straight up. But during the firing, they bend, they melt, okay? So I'd like you to write down in your paper a triangle 10, which I have up here in the upper right-hand corner, and put 2,381 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're taking our glaze kiln, our high-fire glaze kiln, to cone 10. So when that number 10 cone has fallen down all the way, we've reached 2,381 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot. Yeah. So actually, if you write another number for me on your papers, you're going to put ECC, bisque, BISQUE. So I'm pointing here to the upper right of the chalkboard. And you're going to put 1,860 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the temperature we go to for our bisque firing. Now, it isn't so much that we simply got our kiln to get to that temperature. But does anybody here know what the physics definition of work is with regard to temperature? It's temperature over time. So if we think about it, what are we really doing when we're firing something to get a beautiful glaze on it, a shiny, beautiful glaze? What are we really doing? So we talked about the phases of matter are solid. You heat it up, it becomes liquid, right? So when we have a piece of pottery that's been bisqued, we glaze it. So Gary here has a bowl, and he's got a bowl that with the glaze is kind of falling off. The people got it on a little too thick. So does it look shiny at this point? It hasn't been fired yet. It's just somebody put the glaze on it and it dried, okay? So the funny thing is that people kind of think about glaze as being liquid. But we're going to find out that glaze really isn't liquid. What it is powdered silica, some powdered feldspar, and some powdered primary clay, powder, like flour, powdered sugar, and we've just put it into water. So it looks like it's liquid. But as you can see, when it dries, this is still a solid. It's just a dry powder that's been put on this. So what are we really doing? What's the difference between this and, say, this surface? Because they sure look a lot different, right? This one got melted. And then, so melting has to do with taking this solid up to a certain temperature where it became liquid, didn't it? And if you get it too thick, so now this one is stuck to a cookie. So you see that we always ask that you put your, you put your projects on a cookie. It's okay. We have more cookie. So this is just a piece of clay. And we let it dry. And then we bisque fired it. And then we painted kiln wash. So we're also going to find out what the recipe for kiln wash is. And we painted kiln wash on it, on both sides. And then this person, so pass that around. And this person, they were good. They put their piece on a cookie, but they got their glaze on too thick. And it actually fell off. And you can see how it kind of ran down during the fire because it melted. And it just moved down and got stuck to the cookie. Okay? So this is what happens when you get too much glaze. The glaze is too thick. So I'd like you to put your fingers together for how thick you think a dime is. A dime is about 1 millimeter. And just tell yourself that's too thick. Now make your fingers go half of that. That's how thick we'd like it to be on the outside, on the top half of your pot when you've glazed it. So we like to glaze our pots upside down, so we'll get it thicker at the top. Now make your fingers go to a dime again, so you know that's too thick. And then go half of that, so you have half a dime. And then go half of that. Your fingers are almost touching, right? A quarter of a dime, that's how thick we'd like to have it on the floor, on the inside of your pot, on the floor, and on the outside bottom half. So as I pass this pot around, I want you to look at it. You can see that it's almost 1 millimeter thick. So this is too thick, and that's why it was falling off. And had we not caught this piece, had we put it in the fire, it would have crawled. Do you see how there's places there where there's blue glaze and other places where there's none? Second. So well, no, we dip it. We dip or pour. So you can see here, there's places where, I'm just going to turn it for you. So you can see there's places where there's white and there's places where there's blue. So the blue is where the glaze adhered, and the places where it's white, that's where the pot is showing. Okay? So, if we think about igneous rock, that's the molten stuff. So that's when one of those plates dove under and went down far enough into the earth that it got so hot, the rocks became fluid, magma. Okay. Now, and by the way, most people guess that clay comes from sedimentary. So I have a sample of granite. This is a sample of granite countertop. This is granite. So I have a sample of that. I'll pass around. And this actually is a piece of limestone. So this is actually a piece of sedimentary. And if you feel how hard the granite was and how hard this limestone is, you know, they're really hard. Okay? Not like sandstone. And metamorphic, if you kind of think about diamonds, you know, coal, compressed, metamorph, right? So most people think that clay comes from sedimentary rock, but no. Clay actually it's a type of igneous rock. But there's two ways that this molten rock can cool. Now, this is not a piece of lava, but doesn't it kind of look like lava? Kind of. So this was actually a low fire project. Somebody brought the wrong clay into our studio. They made a bowl or a mug, and it simply melted. This was the back of our old kiln. Before we got our new kiln, we used to put things right on the floor of the kiln, and we had to pry it off the floor of the kiln. So that's why we use cookies now. But you can see how it melted. Be careful because this edge is kind of thick when you're handling it. But lava looks sort of like that. So if this molten hot liquid fluid rock comes out the mouth of a volcano, lava, we call that lava. We say that it cools fast, and we say that it's homogeneous, right? It all looks the same. It looks like a sponge. Now, if this same molten hot fluid rock cools very slowly, meaning it doesn't come out of a volcano, it stays underneath the surface of the Earth's crust, and it cools very slowly, that's how we get granite. Same stuff, cooled fast, cooled slowly. So we say that this is heterogeneous, okay? And if you look, as you were looking at this, did you all notice that there's some kind of clear crystals and some black ones and some kind of whitish ones? There's different crystals here. So what I want you to know is that there's two crystals in granite that we really care about. So on my chalkboard here, I've written silica, and I have a star by it. So we're going to spend a long time talking about silica and feldspar. So granite, when that molten magma has a chance to cool very slowly under the surface of the Earth's crust, it doesn't shoot out of a volcano. It doesn't come onto the seafloor bottom. It doesn't make it out past the Earth's crust. It doesn't escape. But there's some little fissure in the Earth's crust where it can go, but it doesn't spit out. Then it has a chance to cool slowly, and it basically forms little crystals. So the one that we call silica is the one that looks sort of like ice. It's kind of clear. The one that looks like a fried egg white, the opaque white, that's the feldspar. The one that's kind of black looking would be the hornblende. Okay. So we don't care so much about hornblende, and we don't care so much about mica, but we really care about silica and feldspar. I want to scare you guys enough about silica that whenever you see it on the floor, you're going to use a wet mop and immediately clean it up. We don't use dustpans and brooms around here. We use wet sponges and wet mops to clean up because we don't want to breathe in the silica dust. Okay. Has anybody heard about silicosis? Has anybody ever seen someone with emphysema? What does it look like when they're trying to breathe? My neighbor had it, and she would what's called tripoding. She would put her arms down, and she would use her back muscles to try to breathe. So basically, what we have in our lungs are these little balloons. Okay, what happens when we do this? What are we doing when we breathe in? Yeah, what's in air? That's right. What's in air? Oxygen. Okay. Now, why do we eat? Because we're hungry, we get to come to ceramics class and make pots. That's why we eat, okay? Because we need the fuel, right? Well, our kiln out there, we have a gas kiln out there. We give it gas, fuel, and it takes in oxygen. We heat it up, we break the bonds, and we make energy. And okay, now when we exhale, what comes out when we exhale? Carbon dioxide, that's right. You're Sema? Sema. So carbon dioxide comes out, and what else? Two things. Sometimes at night you can see your breath. What is that? What is that? It is water. It's steam. It's water. It is. Yeah. So that's the byproduct of when those things burn. So that's exactly what's happening in our gas kiln. And energy is given off. Okay, just like us when we digest our food. Okay. All right. So, okay, now have you guys heard of capillaries? You know, we got these arteries and then we got these veins, okay? So our lungs, we have these like bronchia things, these like tree root sort of things that looks like our lungs, and then at the tips of them, we got a special thing at the tip of those branches. You know what those are called? Does anybody know? They're like little balloons, because that's where when we breathe in and the oxygen is in our lungs, the capillaries are on the other side of those little balloons, and the O2 goes across this barrier. They're called alveoli. Alveoli? They're like little balloons. So the oxygen that we take into our lungs goes past that balloon barrier into those little capillaries, our hemoglobin, and then they offload the CO2 and then we exhale it, right? Okay. So that's what's going on. Well, the problem with silica is it kind of looks like a cowboy spur. It looks like a bottle cap. It's like this flat plate with real jaggedy edges, but it's real small, and it likes to hang around in the air. So if we breathe it in, and guess what? You all already have some in you, because anytime you go to the beach, guess where the sand came from? The granite that used to be the rocks, okay? Have you ever driven around the mountains and you see these signs that say DG? Free DG? Do you know what DG is? Decomposed granite. Okay, it's like finer than gravel, all right? So once the gravel breaks down, so like, you know, when water freezes, what does water do when it freezes in terms of volume? Huh? It gets bigger. It gets bigger when you freeze. So what happens is if a little bit of water falls onto a granite rock that's up in the mountains and it freezes at night, it starts breaking those crystals into their separate components, into the silica and the mica and the hornblende and the feldspar. And some of them are more dense and they go farther, and some are lighter and they kind of float a little bit, so they get all separated, see? The brook and the streams and the rivers, and it takes the silica sand to the beach, right? Or to the desert. So anytime you went to the desert, you're breathing in silica. You go to the beach, yeah. How about Friars Road? That used to be our rock quarry. That's where we used to mine all of our sand for making, yeah, okay. Be sure you log out. Thank you. See you next week. So that's where we used to mine all of our sand for our building projects. So you can come up, or you're happy there. Okay. All right. So the silica comes from the granite. And so it's one of these crystals. So it kind of looks like a cowboy spur, like a bottle cap. So it's got these sharp edges. Now, do you know also inside of your lung, those little fingers that do this and clean stuff out of your lungs so you can cough stuff out? Cilia. They're called cilia. So they're busy trying to get the silica out of your lungs, but it's so heavy that it just ends up in the bottoms of those balloons. And while it's there, it cuts and it makes scar tissue. And that's why it's so hard to breathe, because you've lost that elasticity of your balloons and those alveoli. So that's why I'm such a maniac about keeping this place dust-free. Okay, I can stand visual clutter, but when I see dust on the floor, I want it cleaned up right now. Grab a sponge, grab a mop, just do it, okay? Because it's for all of us. And that's why I don't want people leaving dust on the table. I don't want somebody coming by and slamming something down on the table, and then we breathe all the dust. And that's why I want to have all of those mats that we use when we wedge. I want to have those scrubbed clean when you're done for the day, so that when someone comes and slams some clay on it, we won't all be breathing it. Also, when we sand something, I want you to grab a sheet of newspaper, spray it with a spray bottle, sand it, fold it all up, put that in the trash. I don't want to see people sanding over the trash can, because somebody comes by and they throw something in the trash can, we breathe the dust. Okay? Okay. All right. So I want it to kind of make sense, so it's not just a bunch of rules, okay? I'm trying to protect you and everybody else. Yeah. Grab a water bottle and spray the newspaper, so the newspaper's wet, and then the dust will stick to the newspaper, the wet newspaper. Yeah, yeah. Or just go over to one of the buckets in the sink and sand over that, so it just goes right into the water. Yeah, yeah. I'd like you to write these words down, because someday I hope you might want to help us make a batch of glaze. So I want you to write silica. So that's Silica. And I'd like you to put this number here. There's a little M and then a P and a T. Does anybody know what MPT stands for? Melting point. Did you say melting? Melting point. Yes, you're right. Very good. So all pure substances, and we're talking about pure silica, and here's what it is. It's capital S, small I, capital O, subscript 2. All pure substances have a very tight and discrete point at which they will melt. If it's impure, it has a long melting point. Okay? So this one melts at 3,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, what's cone 10? 2,381 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's quite a bit higher, right? So remember I showed you the cookie that we painted the kiln wash on, so that in case somebody put too much glaze on, we could get the pot separated from the cookie easier. So we're going to put silica. That's our recipe for kiln wash. The first ingredient is silica, because it melts at so much higher than what we go to, because we only go to 2381 Fahrenheit. But silica, pure silica sand, not seashell sand, but it came from the mountain sand, that silica sand, that can go to 3,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the chemistry symbol, SiO2. Because sometimes when I give you a recipe, that's all it's going to say is just SiO2, 2.4 pounds. Well, what's SiO2? Oh, yeah, that's silica. Okay. Next word, as potters, if you see the word flint, that just means silica. Okay, flint. You know, you use a flint to light a fire, right? Quartz, if you see the word quartz. So it's kind of like the word for quart, but with a Z on the end. Quartz. That's silica, as far as potters are concerned. Same stuff, silica. And silicon dioxide. Oh, that's the English for the chemistry, right? So silicon, not silicone, silicon, like Silicon Valley. So silicon and dioxide, because remember it was O2. Now, draw a big line, because all of those words, if you saw them on a recipe to mix up a batch of glaze, that's the powdered form. You know how you can buy, that's the powdered form. You know how you can buy powdered sugar, or you can buy granular sugar? So we're talking about the powder. Those are all powdered forms of silica. That's the really nasty stuff you don't want to breathe. Got to wear a mask. Okay? Now, if you just see the word sand, especially the word silica sand, now we're talking about the granular form. And I happen to have a little bag here of grog. And grog, I have it double bagged so it can't sneak out. But you can feel it between your fingers. You can feel the little granular silica sand. And you can also feel some fine powder in there too. Now, grog can be silica sand, period. Or it can be a piece of pottery that's been broken up, clay without the glaze, clay that's been fired and then broken up. we call that grog. So grog is either silica sand or fired clay that's been ground up. And then we put that into the clay.
Is the same grog when you press in the house between the ceramics they use grog? It's not the same grog.
Yeah, no, it's different. Grog. Okay. So, you know the space shuttle? 1986 is when we had that terrible accident when the space shuttle blew up. Basically, the tiles that cover the space shuttle are silica, okay? And I was listening when that happened, and NASA came on, and they said that the leading edge of the wing, so the space shuttle, when it's flying around, it's going to come back in the Earth's atmosphere, and it starts diving down. So this part, this leading edge of the wing of the plane, when it comes into the Earth's atmosphere, 3,100 degrees. Guess what? That's the melting point of silica. So the tiles covering the plane are actually melting on the way back down. But it takes a while for stuff to melt, right? So that's why they usually could get out of the plane, walk around it, and kiss the ground because it was still melting. It hadn't melted all the way. So usually they got to make their trip successfully. But it really helps you appreciate the bravery of those people, right? All those astronauts. Yeah. Okay, so how did I do? I wanted to scare you enough that you would clean up and not leave messes anywhere. But I didn't want to scare you so much that you won't be here next week. So how'd I do? Are you going to come back next week? Not too scared? Because silica isn't just in this classroom. You go on a dusty street, a truck goes by, and you breathe the dust. You know how you kind of... Yeah, you're trying to get rid of that silica. Okay. All right. So silica, very important. Now, what do we do with silica? So I want you to make a little chart, make a little box, and the title is Kiln Wash. KILNWASH, 2 words, kiln wash. And the first thing is silica. So that's one of the things that we do with silica. Okay, what else do we do with silica? Well, if you look at the recipe for what is porcelain, you'll see that silica is one of the ingredients. So it goes into making kiln wash, it goes into making porcelain clay, powdered silica. And the other thing that we use it for, I want you to start another page on your notes because we're going to talk about what is a bucket of glaze. So draw a rectangle and put triangle 10 glaze. That's its title. And might as well put 2,381 degrees Fahrenheit. And this that means water. So it's basically a bucket of water. So go ahead and write H2O, right? Water. Because glaze is mostly water. Okay, and then, we know that. That's silica. Okay. Now, is anybody worried here? Do we have lead in our glaze? Is anybody here thinking, like, do we have to watch? We don't use lead in our glazes here in our main glaze room. We have about 40 different buckets of glaze. There's no lead. But some people like those really bright colors, like they like their pots to look like this, real bright, yellow, So we can't really get those we get earth tone colors well, but we can't get real bright colors unless we do low fire. So lead is a flux. A flux is an impurity that you add to a pure thing to make it melt at a lower temperature. Lead is a flux that causes silica to melt. Okay, what temperature does silica melt at usually? Very good. 3,100 degrees Fahrenheit. So lead will make silica melt at about 1650 Fahrenheit. Wow. Because there's some clays, as we know, this was a pot that somebody brought in here. It was the wrong cone, and it melted into a puddle. There's some clays that can only go to 1650 Fahrenheit. So if you use lead on those pots, you still get to have your pot, and you still get to, drink tea out of it or something. Now, this is a pot that was probably a cone 6 pot. It was a little cup, and it used to be standing up like this, And then during the firing, it fell over, and then somebody poked a hole in it. But here's the top, here's the bottom, and this is the side of this pot. So this one just slumped and kind of fell over during the firing. So it didn't melt as badly as that one. So this was probably a cone 6 pot. And so this pot right here is showing that it used to be a bowl. It was sitting up a normal sized bowl, but it was the wrong cone, and it melted and just kind of slumped down. So it had a cookie on the back. That's a normal cookie, but it melted during the firing. So this was not cone 10 clay. And then lead is used as a flux to make the glaze melt at a lower temperature. Thank you. So here's another pot. You can see the cookie here, but you can see the pot is on top of the cookie, and it was a really pretty. The person put yellow slip and blue slip and painted it on there real nice. But it was the wrong clay and it melted. Somebody had donated some clay to us, and we didn't test it first, and people just made stuff, and then all these things melted. So then I had to have everybody test their own clay to make sure they didn't have the wrong clay. Well, we're humans, we make mistakes sometimes. Okay. So we had everybody take a little piece of their from their bag of clay and just form a little pinch pot like a thimble and put their name on it. And then we dried it, and then we bisque fired it. So if you look here, we see that you start with greenware, and then it's dry, and then we bisque it. And then we took a crucible, something that we knew was cone 10, and we put their things inside of it. And then we fired them in the high fire kiln as a test. No glaze on it, just did it melt or not.
And if it failed that,
Yeah.
you go back and do it at a different...
No, they take that bag of, well, yeah, they take that clay out of here because we don't even want it to cross our threshold. We don't want it in here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So any clay you're not sure of, we have you keep it at home. Just bring in a small little piece. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so is that pretty clear? Okay. So we do not use lead, except we have some specialty glazes in little teeny jars, and we keep them separate. Over here, I'm pointing here by the drinking fountain in the next area over. Those do have lead. But they've been formulated so they won't leach out into your food. However, they're meant to go to cone 06, which is really low temperature, and we're going to cone 10. So you should only use those for the outside of something. Don't put it on the inside. Okay. So what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on now was the feldspar. So when granite breaks down, decomposed granite, and we have the crystals of silica, the mica, the hornblende, and the feldspar. Feldspar is just one of the crystals that's in granite, but when feldspar breaks down, we get clay. Clay and these 4 things right here. Na, mg, k, and ka. What's Na? Natrium. What is Na? Eat too much of that, you get high blood pressure, right? Sodium. Yeah. Okay. So some of the feldspars are really high in sodium. We have some here. We have a sodium feldspar. One day we ran out of our potassium feldspar because usually to make a bucket of glaze, our flex will be a potassium feldspar for 2381 Fahrenheit. But one day we had run out of our potassium feldspar, and somebody saw, oh, look, here's a drawer, and it says soda spar. I'll just use that instead. So they just substituted it. Well, when the glaze came out, you could strike a match on the surface of the glaze and light the match because it was so matte. So it wasn't a strong enough flux to make the silica melt. Okay, so you can find sodium feldspars. How about Mg? What's that one? That's right, magnesium. Okay, so let's see. You're constipated. The little blue bottle of Phillips milk of magnesia, right? It helps relax smooth muscles so that you can have a bowel movement. Okay, so that's great. How about the letter K? What's that one? Potassium. Potassium. So bananas. What else? Oranges, orange juice. Prunes. Potatoes, white potatoes, sweet potatoes. Those will have potassium in them. Okay? And if you have enough of that in your diet, it can help lower your blood pressure. Okay, how about Ca? What's that one? Calcium. Okay, so where do we find that in us? Yeah, teeth, bones. Okay. So where do we get that? Milk? Where'd they get it? Yeah. So come on. Spinach, kale, collard greens, broccoli, right? Brussels sprouts. Yeah. Okay. So here's how it goes. I always say at this point, who do we have to thank for this class? So we have my dean, the one who keeps offering me to teach this class. Okay. We have Constance Carroll. She's the chancellor of our district. The state chancellor of California really wanted to do away with the ceramics for seniors statewide. They really wanted her to stop offering it. So we have to thank her for saying, no, I want to make my own decision locally. And she allowed us to keep going, even though the state chancellor was after her to cut it. So I need to acknowledge her. Also, our governor, because we're part of the Emeritus program. We're a mandated area to have free classes for people aged 55 and up. So we have to always thank our governor. Okay, and then the president, because the president makes sure that the funding goes from the federal level to the state so that we can have these classes. But I say besides all those people, it's these people over here. I've written their names sideways on the chalkboard. So I want you to make a little list of 2 names in particular, and then Chinese emperors. Okay, so here we go. I want you to write down this name right here. It's Shoji Hamada. He's from Japan. So it's the letter S-H-O-J-I. That's his first name, Shoji. Hamada. Hamada. So if you can find one of his books, check it out of the library and start reading it. He was the living national treasure in Japan of ceramics. And he came from a pretty wealthy family. He was going to become a painter. He was going to go to art school and become, a painter. But right about that time, he and Bernard Leach, so write this one down. Bernard, Bernard, Leach, Leach. And he's got books too, so check out his books. So can somebody tell us a little bit about the Industrial Revolution? What was that all about? Manufacturing, yeah. Mass production, yes. Some more keywords we can have there. Machines, like replacing humans with machines, right? So ceramics started to become mechanized. Molds were made. They have this gun that would shoot liquid clay into the molds and spin it, so it was all even and everything. It all became automated, mechanized. Okay, so Mr. Hamada started having a little difficulty with that because in Japan, your granddad puts clay away for his future grandson. So he's using clay that his grandfather got ready for him because he wanted to have it aged, so it'd be nice to work with. That's thinking ahead, right? Okay. In this country, in the Indians who live here, the mother teaches the daughter, and she will teach her daughter. So it's generally done by ancestors, lots of generations, and everywhere on the earth, the clay, depending on the rocks, depending on how the feldspars are, the clay is a little different. Some clay is more pure, and you can fire it higher. Some of it is more contaminated, and you can fire it lower. So all the different areas where the clay is, the traditions are there because they know what works, what trees to chop down to fire it, things like that. So Mr. Hamada and Mr. Leach started looking around their own countries, and then they kind of went to the other guy's country and looked around there, and they're kind of like, yeah, man, this is a bad dream, So Hamada decided not to go to art school, and he decided to become a potter. And Leach also. So had they not done it, we wouldn't be here. And then there's Chinese emperors. So have you all seen the pottery? The blue and white porcelain. Do you ever go to Ranch 99? market? Have you ever walked around that strip mall and seen these pots? There's some pots that are this tall. They're $1,000 each. They're porcelain. If you go there, you'll see these beautiful pots. Now, have you noticed how some of them are blue and white? Those were for use by the emperor, especially if you see when they have the dragon. If it has 5 claws, that's for the emperor. If the dragon only has 4 claws, that would be for a good friend of an emperor, but not for the emperor. Emperor has to have 5 claws. Okay, so you have to count the claws on the dragon. And these are some beautiful, absolutely beautiful pieces, that were done. Okay, so we have all these, and then another student just brought me these books. And then we have one here showing some of those horses, the ceramic horses, right, the sculptures of the horses. And then another one you're probably familiar with is the really beautiful celadon. The celadon is that kind of light, pale green ware, right? These beautiful. I mean, really beautiful. And Korea, too, makes things like this, too. So what happened was we have to thank the Chinese emperors because they had an army of artisans. Certain people just knew how to make a potter's wheel, a kick wheel. Some people were like really athletic and they would lay down on their side and like they'd bicycle their legs and they would kick the wheel for the other guy who would throw the pots. Yeah. Some people are just really good to know how to make brushes. Other people were really good with painting with brushes. Other ones knew how to build a kiln. Okay. Now, does anybody know how old porcelain is? When was the first porcelain made that we know? How long ago? Pretty close. More. Worse than that. More. Older than that. Yeah, China. 1,500 years ago. Okay? Now, how long have we had electricity? 100 years? Okay. If you build a bonfire, how hot does it get? Big, go to the beach, bunch of wood, what? 1,400, 1,200, 1,600, somewhere. It depends on how much wood and all that stuff, okay? But nowhere near 2,381 Fahrenheit. So if you build a brick oven out of clay, you can sort of get to 2,000. How are you going to get to 2,381? Because porcelain, if you get it thin enough, you can see through it, right? If I hold up this paper and move my hand around, you can see the shadow of my finger move, right? So porcelain is translucent because what is it really? It's silica plus some feldspar, and it just turned out that in China, their feldspar was really high in calcium. And if you put silica plus feldspar together, that equals glass. And then if you just throw in a little primary clay, which is feldspar when it broke down, primary clay, you take some of that powdered primary clay, you add it to some feldspar and some silica, that's what porcelain is. But you got to take it to 2,381 Fahrenheit. So how'd they do that? So that's why I say we really have to thank the Chinese, because they had this army of artisans. And they figured out that if you took a slope, a hill, and didn't just put one little kiln on it, but you made a whole bunch of them that were connected like a caterpillar, and it's going up the side of a slope of a hill, and you put the chimney on the top, when the wind blows, it blows all of the CO2 and the H2O and the smoke, it blows that, and it sucks in more what? More oxygen. So you get to that temperature, 2,381 Fahrenheit, without having to have a bellows that you're pumping, because it takes 5 days to fire one of these kilns. Night and day and night and day and night and day and night and day and night and day of stoking each little section of the kiln to get it up to that temperature. So, I mean, come on. We got to thank them, because they figured all that out. And it's because their rocks were super high in the calcium and the feldspar, so that when they mix that with their silica, which is the same everywhere on the planet, and their primary clay, they ended up with porcelain. So without them goofing around, figuring all this out, we wouldn't know that. So, does anybody here have any bone china? Have you ever heard of bone china? Okay, is anybody here a vegan, vegetarian vegan? You are? You are? Is she? Well, no, I had a student take my class once. She was a vegan. And she had just inherited her grandmother's, like, 12 place setting bone china set, you know? Yeah, she had to get rid of it. Okay, bone china. What? So, what's in bones? Okay, so here's the deal. China, they were the only ones making this stuff, right? So other countries, they would give them, I don't know what they gave them for money, but they traded them something. Have you ever noticed some of the stuff that looks just like this blue and white, but it's red and white? Can you find a picture in there of something that's red and white? So the export ware from China was red and white. That was their export ware. So these countries, they would pay whatever they would pay, and they would get their shipment. They'd be all happy. Okay, good. But then along comes who? Arg. Yeah. Thank you. So here we have the red and white stuff. It's just like the blue and white, but it's the red and white. So that's for export. Johnny Depp, right? All the pirates, right? So they would hold up the ships, huh? Steal the stuff, right? And the poor country, they paid their money. They're waiting for their ship to come in. It's not coming in. It's like, what are they going to do? I mean, they're, come on. They want this stuff, right? What are you going to do? They're the only ones that know how to make it. You send spies over there. Well, you're trying, but you don't have the same ingredients. So you send spies because this was a secret recipe. The silica, the feldspar, the primary clay, it was secret. Okay, so they got the secret recipe. Okay, they tried it. They took their silica, their feldspar that wasn't high in what the Chinese had, calcium, and the primary clay, and it didn't work. But they were smart enough to know, oh, it needs some calcium. Where do you find calcium? Bones. Osteoporosis, right? So you eat all the meat, right? You eat off the bones. Then you cremate them. You burn the bones. And you're left with this bone ash. It has other stuff in it besides calcium, phosphorus, other stuff too. But anyway, yay, you got some calcium. So you add that to your mix of your porcelain that you can make from your rocks. And it's bone china. But it's not as good as the Chinese stuff. Because, come on, they make stuff that's like taller than I am. And they fire it to 2,381 Fahrenheit and it doesn't fall down. It had a really good strength to it. So bone china is known as soft paste porcelain. And it kind of deforms more. Okay, so let's take a little break and go around the class. So if you want to turn it off for a second, you can, or keep it going, I don't care. And just say your name and one thing that's like, wow, I didn't know that. Like, that's interesting.